Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of Experimenting with Existence, a series where I discuss my non-philosophy related interests. And in this particular episode, episode 2, we're going to be discussing one of my more recent hobbies, that being hiking, and in particular, at least here at the outset, hiking 14ers in Colorado. And so it's sort of interesting how this Experimenting with Existence series has unfolded because it seems like each episode is sort of a series within the series. And I think this particular episode 2, hiking, will turn out to be no different because what I plan to do, this is going to be sort of an introductory video, but henceforth, and I'll discuss this in more detail here in a little bit, but henceforth all the videos related to this episode are going to take a look at a particular hike that I've done. And so what I'm going to do here in the outset in this first video is discuss all the other things that I want to discuss before I then dive into those particular hikes. So that's what I'm going to be up to. Amongst other things, I'm going to be discussing what exactly I'm talking about when I reference a 14er, what it is exactly that I'm going to be doing in these episodes and why really I'm doing this. Why is it that I'm into hiking and why I want to do this particular episode as well. And I will also get into then in another section of the video my history with hiking. How far back does it go? As we'll see, my experience with 14ers per se, I don't have that long of a history with those, but hiking in general, my history does go pretty far back. I'll also offer quite a few reflections. Again, I want to kind of touch on all the different sorts of things I want to discuss that are related to hiking and that aren't hike specific, right? That'll come up in each particular video, right? So not surprisingly, then I'll have a lot of different things I want to talk about, with respect to sort of general reflections on hiking. Again, hiking 14ers in Colorado. So I'll be discussing, amongst other things, Colorado itself and, getting to know the state, altitude sickness and what that's like, getting acclimated to the altitude, the different ranges and so on and so forth. I'll talk about as well in a subsequent section then sort of the day of the hike, right? It's usually an all-day sort of thing, or at least I devote pretty much an entire day to a hike of a 14er, if not more. I haven't done more than a one-day hike, but that's certainly possible, especially with some of the longer ones. But I'll get into sort of what a typical day has been like, and I've done 13 up to this point, and I'll get into which ones specifically later on. But so I have a sort of a general sort of feel for what the day of a hike is like, and so I'll relay that to you as well. And then I'll finish this video by articulating again what exactly I'm going to be doing henceforth in each of the subsequent videos. And in general, right, that's going to be taking a closer look at each particular hike, but again, I'll get into the nuances of that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into section 1, if you will, and discuss the what and the why. What exactly am I doing here? Again, I want to discuss one of my recent loves, and that's hiking. Hiking in particular, or specifically, 14ers in Colorado. And I guess I'll just lay that out at the outset here that my plan, I don't really have anything planned other than to continue conquering these 14ers in Colorado, but I do want to leave it open the possibility of including other hikes, and they'll usually be more intense, sort of equivalent to a 14er in Colorado kind of hikes if I'm including them in this series, right? But I want to leave it kind of open, but at least at the outset here, I'm dealing exclusively with 14ers in Colorado, and you can kind of, everything I say henceforth, for the most part, unless I say otherwise, you can sort of assume applies to 14ers in Colorado. So I want to get into, again, this series, or this episode in the series, episode 2 of Experimenting with Existence, the series, right? We're going to get into my love of hiking, explore all sorts of different facets of it, particularly in this first video, and then again, every subsequent video will sort of take a closer look at a particular hike. But why am I doing this? Well, others have suggested, it'd be really cool to kind of see what it's like, to see some of your pictures and your videos and whatnot. And a lot of people I, for one, up until, 3 years ago, right? It was when I climbed my first, 14er. I never really knew what it was like, other than watching maybe a few videos here and there. And so that's really, for a lot of us, that's how we can get sort of an impression of what it's actually like, is to see the pictures and videos of the people who have been there and done that. So that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this episode, is because I want to offer this for others who have mentioned that they'd be interested in seeing what my hikes have been like, and for the population in general, maybe some of you out there that I don't know that might be interested in trying to conquer a 14er, whether it be in Colorado or elsewhere. And so again, that is one of the reasons why I'm offering this episode, but as well, or also, I'm doing it in part to kind of document my own hikes, personally, and to kind of relive the highlights, if you will, of each of these particular hikes myself. It's a nice way to, again, document these hikes as I go through them, and to kind of capture, in a sense, what each hike was like, and to, again, myself relive these great experiences for the most part, foreshadowing some things to come here. It hasn't all been great, these hikes, but again, more on that later. So that's enough in terms of what this is all about, and why it is I'm doing this episode. Let's go ahead and discuss then my hiking history, at least up to this point. So my hiking history actually goes pretty far back. So if you've watched any of my other videos, I mentioned quite a bit, reference my extensive travel, at least when I was younger. I don't really travel as much as an adult. I haven't, at least. Not that I don't, but as I've mentioned in my other videos, I just don't have the interest anymore, and that probably stems from doing so much traveling as a youth. But anyway, the whole point was I did a lot of traveling as a youth, and a lot of that travel would entail, oftentimes, hitting national parks and the like, and doing sort of outdoor excursions, including lots of hiking and various trails and so on. And from what I recall, I actually didn't really like it at all. In fact, I grew to kind of hate going to these trails as a youngster. I don't remember liking it at all. In fact, one of my most vivid memories was when it was super hot, refusing to go on this hike with my dad, and he insisted on still going, and so I just sat in the car stubbornly while he went on this like hour, 2 hour hike, and so that was like the most, what's the word, most significant memory I have of my childhood in terms of hiking and trails and such. So it wasn't, I don't have fond memories of hiking and doing trails and whatnot as a kid, but I did have a lot of experience nonetheless. And so that's actually one thing I've kind of naturally, as I've grown to really appreciate and love doing these hikes, it's one thing I've reflected on a lot. What's that all about? Why is it that as these years have gone on, that I've grown to appreciate hikes, and not even just hikes, but nature in general? Is that sort of a common or popular trend for people in general, or is that sort of a pattern of life for human beings in general? Do younger people just tend to not, on a whole, respect nature as much, or get into it as much? Not that they don't, or that some don't, right? But on a whole, does that tend to be the case? I think about that a lot, and at least for me personally, that does seem to have been the case. It's certainly something that my fondness for nature, for being in the great outdoors, if you will, that has increased exponentially as I've gotten older. And along those same lines, for what it's worth, my own kids, when it comes to them, they're rather ho-hum when it comes to hiking and doing these trails. I would say they're not quite as against them as I remember being when I was their age, but they're not enthusiastically wanting to go hike. When we go to Colorado, we pretty much go there at least once a year recently as a family, and they like doing the outdoor stuff, but it's not necessarily at the top of their list. Do a hike. So they're kind of, I would say, neutral, pretty much across the board in terms of hiking and their interests in doing trails and whatnot. Again, they'll do them. Our last visit about a month ago, a little less than a month ago, we were out there, and we went out on a hour and a half hike all the kids and myself, and they all enjoyed it. Nobody was complaining or anything like that. But again, it's not like they're requesting it all the time either. So I would say they're kind of neutral for what it's worth. And I do think it's kind of interesting how my youngest two in particular, they hear me talking so fondly about these 14ers. And so as a trip to Colorado will approach, they'll be like, Dad, can we go on a 12er or a 13er? Can we try these out? And of course, they have no idea what it entails and what it's like. And I try to convey that to them as best I can. But it's just funny to hear them. They do kind of talk about that enthusiastically. But then, our last trip on our property was kind of interesting. You could go and sort of explore the property, and it was right along, it was on the edge of a mountain. So it was very similar to actually going on a trail then. So anyway, the whole point was, so we did some exploring at one point and go down quite a bit along this mountainside to the next actual road. And then what got interesting, though, was on the way back then when we had to work our way up. Oh, they weren't having it at all. By the time we got back up, it was all fun and games on the way down. We had to pick our path. It was very much like doing a trail on a 14er, where you had to be careful, I'm saying, going through all the safety things as we're going down, be very cautious and so on. So it really did emulate going on a 14er pretty well for them, I think. But then, and so they were all enthusiastic about it until then we turn around to ascend back up. And it was pretty difficult. And so at the end, both of the youngest two, they were literally, having fits and ready to just, go lay down for the rest of the afternoon. And I said to them, take that and take it times 100 at least. And that's what you have when you're doing a 14er. So they talk about wanting to do a 14 or a 12 or a 13 or something along those lines. But like many of us, they really don't have any idea of what that's like. And it was kind of funny then again, hearing them on the one hand talk about wanting to do it, and then when they get a taste of it, sort of seeing their reaction to it. Okay, so I intimated earlier that, my first hike of a 14er was about 3 years ago. I want to say July of 2020. So 3 years ago from this July right now. I can't remember what it was in particular that got me going and getting into the 14ers in Colorado. But again, that's when my interest really started up. And when I actually climbed my first one was 3 years ago. I have been, if you've watched my other videos, you probably know this. I've been on a health kick in general over the last 6-7 years. And so I guess it's probably not too surprising. These are pretty challenging physically, and we'll get more into that here in a moment. And it's fairly close. So I guess it's not surprising that, I would sort of find this appealing, right? This climbing a 14er, I'd find that challenge appealing from a physical workout standpoint. I think another sort of point of motivation, or what sort of inspired me to get started, was that I did have a couple of really good friends, and I'll elaborate on these guys actually as we move forward here because they've joined me on some of my hikes. But I had a couple of good friends who had climbed 14ers prior to me climbing my first 14er. And so I'd heard, things about what it was like, and I just remember kind of thinking fondly of it and always being kind of, at first, going way back, when these guys, Dan in particular, when he was climbing a lot of his 14ers, it was probably like a decade ago. And back then I wasn't that, really that interested. But as the years progressed, and as again I started to get more into my health kick, it kind of was there in the back of my mind more and more and more. And I think hearing their experiences, certainly, didn't hurt in terms of developing then at some point my own interest in doing these 14ers. So I mentioned my first 14er back in the summer of 2020. That was Mount Bierstadt, and that's going to be naturally the subject of the part 1 video, the first one where I take a closer look at my hikes. And I'll probably just go, makes sense, right, to go, sequentially, chronologically in order. So we'll start with my rookie effort, that first summit I had of Mount Bierstadt in the summer of 2020. and I'll talk, all about sort of what that experience is like. Again, in the next video of this episode, part 1, when we talk about Mount Bierstadt. But I had Jamie and Josh, a couple buddies of mine, joining me for that climb, and it was Josh's rookie effort as well. So again, more on that in the next video. So up to this point, sort of wrapping up this section and kind of my history hiking up to this point, or at least history hiking in particular, 14ers in Colorado. I've summited, as I mentioned earlier, 13 peaks up to this point, including one from a little less than a month ago. That was Pikes Peak, so that was my most recent summit. What do they say when you bag a peak? That was the most recent peak I bagged, I guess. So, and I'm going to be adding, the plan is to add 2 more, including the first southern 14er in Colorado. And I'll get more into what I mean by that here in a little bit. But next week, actually, I'm heading out to Colorado again with Jamie. And so we plan to tackle 2 of them, including my first southern one, Southern Peak. So more on that a little bit later. That's the plan anyway. So we'll be adding, or, I will hopefully be adding 2 more peaks to this. But up to this point, it's been 13. I'll go ahead and just rattle those off real quick. Bierstadt, and these are in order: Bierstadt, Quandary, Grays, Tories, Sherman, Democrat, Cameron, Lincoln, Bross, Yale, Elbert, Huron, and Pikes Peak, as I mentioned, was my most recent escapade. So let's go ahead, and I have a lot to say in terms of hiking in general. Again, hiking with respect to these Colorado 14ers. I have a lot of general reflections, right? I want to speak to all these different things that I have to say before I then get into the particular videos that chronicle each particular hike. So, lots to say here. Let's go ahead and dive in then and discuss some of my general reflections. First of all, a general disclaimer: I am certainly no expert. As I already foreshadowed earlier, it hasn't all been fun and games for me. In particular, the part 2 video, when I talk about quandary, it was quite a quandary for me. That was my only winter summit so far, and it might be my last. And so I'll say much more about that, at that point, right, when we get into that video. But, I just bring that up now as evidence that I am certainly no expert, okay? So just want to throw that disclaimer out. I have at this point, again, summited 13, so I do feel like I have some experience, but in terms of years, again, we're only talking 3 years. So it is what it is. I just wanted to be upfront in terms of what exactly my experience is, or at least has been to this point. So, what exactly, let's flesh out what exactly is meant by a 14er. How many are there? What do we mean by them? So on and so forth. So, look, there are these kind of official guidelines in play in order to determine what officially constitutes a 14er, an official peak, so to speak. But what we mean in general by a 14er is a peak that is 14,000 feet or more above sea level. And so they do have, like I mentioned, sort of guidelines in place because, for example, if 2 peaks are right too close, and I think it's 300 feet. I printed this off earlier. Must have at least 300 feet of prominence to qualify, and I think that basically what that means is it has to be 300. How high the summit has to rise above its surroundings. So it has to be at least 300 feet above its closest surrounding peaks. It also has to be a certain distance, I believe, from the surrounding peaks. If both of these are like 14,000 plus feet, but then this one, right, if they're not a certain distance apart, even though they might be, that's a terrible marker, even though they might both be 14,000 plus feet, if they're not a certain distance apart, then they'll only count one, I believe, specifically the higher one, and the other one won't count as an official peak then. Again, I'm 95% sure on this. In general, there are these, parameters. I'm just speaking to these in general. And I'm pretty sure, in terms of some of those specifics, they take into account, again, how close the closest peaks are and how far away they are, and if they're far enough away. And again, that idea of prominence, how much higher the peak is than all the surrounding peaks as well. So with all that said, given all those parameters, they have this then sort of these guidelines in place in terms of determining these 14ers. And so there's this kind of official list. And of course, there's some gray area and there's some debate about certain ones. But if you go on right now, the general consensus is that Colorado has 53 official 14ers. And so I'm talking about the United States only, and that's really all I'll speak to. And again, I'm not an expert at all, but I've dealt exclusively with Colorado 14ers, and so for the rest of the video, that's really what we'll be talking about. But here at the outset, I will say again, Colorado has 53 official 14ers, but then California also has some. They have 12 official 14ers. Washington has 2, and then Alaska also has 29. And if you count Alaska, then it has 22 of the top, the highest peaks, right? The top 22 in the United States, counting Alaska anyway, would then be in Alaska. So those are the 4 states that have 14ers in the United States. Not counting Alaska, Colorado, even counting Alaska, Colorado has the significant majority, especially if you discount Alaska. Right? Colorado is really where it's at in terms of the 14ers. California has a fair amount as well, and Washington, has a couple, but really Colorado is where it's at for 14ers, at least in my opinion. I mentioned Alaska having a lot of the tallest ones, including Denali. That's number 1. It comes in at 20,310 feet high. So again, Alaska, if you include those, you're getting way up there. And one of the things I'll talk about here in a little bit is altitude and how much that is a factor. That's probably pretty obvious, right? But when we're climbing these mountains, how much of a factor that really is. And so, just doing these 14ers, it's a huge factor. I can't imagine, adding another 6,000 feet above sea level, what that would be like. Because I'll get into this again more here in a little bit, but that's really the number one thing for me is struggling with the oxygen deprivation, not having enough oxygen when you get up that high. That really is the thing I struggle with the most. Everything else I can really handle. Usually, not that any of it's easy, right? But fairly easy, relatively speaking. It's just that when you get up there, that you can really feel the lack of oxygen. So again, add another 6,000. I can't even imagine what that's like. Okay, so anyway, like I mentioned, we're going to go back and exclusively deal with Colorado and its 14ers. So I've gotten to know Colorado pretty well over the past few years, as you might suspect. I typically will go out there. It's at least the last 3 years. It seems like I've gone out at least a couple times each summer. Generally, not necessarily in the summer. Sometimes we've gone out in the winter as a family. But I'll at least get out to Colorado a couple times. Usually once with the family and then once with friends. And in both cases, usually I will try to bag a 14 or bag one of the peaks. So, over the last 3 years, I've probably been out there 8 to 10 times. So really gotten to know Colorado pretty well. I have all these books on Colorado, at least 3, 4, 5, and including some really nice maps of the Colorado 14ers. Of course, they're in the side door of our van, and my wife and the kids are gone in the van, so I don't have those. I was going to use those for props and kind of show those off. But I do have this nice, before I forget to mention it, this 14er tracker here. It looks like the state of Colorado, Denver would be about right here. And it has all the 14ers then there. My wife got that for me for, I don't remember if it was a birthday or Father's Day. So I guess for my next birthday, I'll have to ask for the pins to put in there or whatever they are, but to track the ones I've been to, or I've summited. But yeah, so I've gotten some, books over the years, sort of getting into Colorado in general, and not just, the 14ers, but naturally then also, I like to do research on the 14ers as well. And so typically before I go, out there, I will do some research. Makes sense, right? With respect to the particular 14er I'm going to be hiking, and the city we'll be staying at, and so on and so forth. So really gotten to know the state rather well, like I was intimating. There's all kinds of different ranges. I want to say 5 or 6, including like the Front Range, Mosquito Range, Sawatch Range. What else? Angre de Cristo Mountains, the San Juan Mountains. Some of these are, again, in the southern portion of the state. And you can kind of see here, right? There's this division here. You have the southern 14ers, at the bottom, right, and then the northern 14ers, if you will. And the 2-pack map set I have is actually divvied up, with the northern ones just like that, and then the southern ones. And for what it's worth, the southern ones are generally much more difficult. So the 14ers, at least if you're going off 14ers.com, and shout out to that site, I use it a lot. If you start getting into this, you'll probably come across that site as well and really, get a lot of use out of it. But they classify all these different 14ers in terms of their difficulty, and there's 5 different classes: class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the southern ones, those tend to be much more difficult. All the class, for the most part, not all of them, but for the most part, the class 1 and class 2 peaks, which is the ones I'm dabbling in, more on that in a little bit, those are all, for the most part, again, in the northern ranges. But there are these different ranges with these different mountains that have sort of different feel. Each of the ranges has a different feel as well. And the more you hike in these peaks in each particular range, the more you get a sense of that, which makes sense. Again, for the majority of these 14ers that are in my league, the class 1, the class 2 peaks, basically you go to Denver and you go an hour or two west on I-70, and then you go south a little bit, and then those are where most of the peaks are, right? So again, Denver being in here, right? You go a little bit to the west and then down, and that's where all those peaks are. At least the ones I'm checking off. So another thing that I've gotten a feel for over the years, and if you get into these 14ers, you best get a feel for it as well, and that's weather and what that's like. Especially during these hikes, you really want to take that into consideration naturally. One thing I've sort of garnered an appreciation for over the years is just how different it can be. The weather can be. So you usually stay in a town that's somewhat close to the peak you're going to climb. But never mind where you're staying, right? Take the closest town to whatever particular peak you're going to climb. It struck me how different the weather can be in that town, right? That's, say, 5 miles away from the peak, right? Versus the weather on the peak itself. They can be completely different. In fact, this last hike I did of Pikes Peak, that was pretty much the case. The closest towns, they were actually having weather, whereas Pikes Peak itself was fine. It was pretty much clear the entire day. So that's something that stuck out to me over the years, is just how different the weather can actually be at the top of the mountain versus in all the surrounding areas. And of course, the mountains themselves are affecting weather in significant ways, blocking, weather systems and so on. So you get a lot of funky weather in the mountains. As they say, it can change in an instant. So the weather really keeps you on your toes, and that's something that you always are keeping an eye on and monitoring when you're doing these hikes. At least you should. And it's no joke. So I've done one winter hike, pretty much probably one and done. So, I'm talking about, for the most part, summer hikes. That's what I've done. 12 out of 13 of these hikes has been summer. And so in general, you're looking at, say, highs during the day in the close towns nearby of, say, like in the 70s, and it gets down to maybe in the 40s at night. A lot of people, a lot of the houses up there in the mountains, they won't have air conditioners just because it gets so cool, even in the summer at night. And even when it's hot, let's say it gets up in the 80s, maybe even in the 90s, it is always a dry heat. Right? The bugs are never that bad. It's conversely, right? It's like the opposite of Kansas City. I hate the heat here because it's always so humid as well. It's just oppressive. Running here, it can make such a huge difference, whether it's hot or not, right? And in fact, like 88 degrees versus 93 degrees can actually make a world of difference running here, just because the humidity, throw that in then, and it just affects even being able to breathe. It's terrible. Whereas again in Colorado, the nice thing about the heat there, which really isn't any to speak of, is it's not humid at all. So it's a dry heat, the best kind of heat if you ask me. So you're looking at like 70s generally for highs, and then like dropping down into the 40s, and basically subtract 20 for the peaks, right? So high usually like in the 50s maybe on these peaks, and then again dropping down to the 20s, if not maybe even a little cooler in the summer. It'll get down there. And in fact, one of the cool things is you'll still see snow almost year round, if not sometimes year round on a lot of these 14ers. I mentioned that already. So I talked about altitude, or I at least referenced it earlier. Obviously, you're climbing mountains, you're getting up in the mountains. That's a huge factor. That's altitude. I talked about how I can't even imagine climbing some of those in Alaska that are like, they're not like 20,000 feet. It's a real phenomenon. In fact, when I went out this a little less than a month ago, I referenced our last family trip out there. Pretty much everyone got sort of some symptoms of altitude sickness. A lot of times, well, what are those symptoms? Headaches, diarrhea, nausea, just not feeling well in general. All of these sort of elements. And at one point or another, like I said, pretty much everybody on the trip, including myself, although I feel like I had these symptoms the least, but including myself, we all had them at one point or another. And I do think that, it makes sense for me to have them the least, because I do think it's something that you do get acclimated to. And the more you go out there or go up there, the less that's going to be an issue for you, each time. And so there's a reason why residents can climb these mountains and not be as affected by the altitude versus, residents from out of state, because they're acclimated to the altitude. So that's definitely something that is for real, and that I appreciate a great deal. And in fact, I've committed to basically, there's been times where when I get out there, the next morning, the first morning I'm in Colorado, I'll climb a 14er. In the first, let's say 5 or 6 hikes, there's at least a couple of those where that was the case. And now I do everything in my power to make sure that doesn't happen, to ensure at the very least I have the day after we get there to get acclimated to the altitude. Because I mentioned this earlier, I really do think that it's probably, fighting a lack of oxygen is for me personally, probably the most difficult aspect of doing these 14ers. It really is. Not that any of it's easy, and I'll get more into that here in a little bit, but, climbing the mountain, it's given all the various aspects, and we'll get more into the nuances of that here in a bit, but it really is, as you get higher and higher, the most difficult thing, at least for me personally, it really is that lack of oxygen. It doesn't matter how fit I am, right? I consider myself a very fit individual, at least, at this point in my life, and I struggle. Like, as soon as I get, especially above tree line, but in particular the last third of the hikes, usually you just feel it. And again, it doesn't matter who you are. If you're out of state, at least, if you're not a resident, you're going to, it doesn't matter how good a shape you're in, you are going to feel it. And take whatever, you just go out to Colorado, right? Never mind climbing these mountains, you'll experience altitude sickness, quite possibly. As I mentioned, the rest of my family members, there was, how many were there total? 9 of us. All 9 of us experienced some symptoms, and the other 8, none of the others climbed these climbed a mountain like I did, and they're still experiencing, altitude sickness. So imagine, again, you're going to go out to Colorado. If you're not used to the altitude, just being out there, you're going to experience some of these issues. Then add on top of that, trying to then climb up and gain altitude even more. It's going to be a huge factor, and it definitely is something you're going to need to consider if you haven't done this before, right? It's something you're going to need to consider and really be ready for. Not that you can't handle it, but you're going to be taking lots of breaks when you get up there. What exactly is it that I like about 14ers? Why is it that I've developed this passion for them? And for me, I kind of boiled it down to 3 basic factors, I think. And these are in no particular order, but the solitude. I'm one that really gets overwhelmed. If you know me personally, you probably hear me complain about this all the time. The big city living, it's really not for me. It adds up. It overwhelms me. I hate sitting at stoplights, just wasting my time. So the big city living again overwhelms me. I am one who has to escape from time to time. And what better place, what offers more solitude and more of an escape from everyday life than being out on these mountains, right? Out in the great outdoors, in these remote, right? On the remote sides of these mountains where very few people, go. Granted, don't get me wrong, these 14ers are fairly popular, especially in the summer. But still, for the significant majority of your hike up and down these 14ers, you're by yourself, or unless you're with other climbers, that you've gone with, right? You're going to be, if you're going by yourself that day, you're going to be by yourself for the vast majority of the day. And I really enjoy that. I love the escape. I love, again, there's something about, not only does it offer that solitude, but in combination with the beauty too of nature, that being the other thing I really get into and love about these hikes, which is probably one of the more obvious things, right? A lot of people can appreciate the beauty of these hikes. You get up there, you get these majestic views that you really can't get anywhere else. And stay tuned, right? We're going to see what these views are like in all the subsequent videos. So obviously I love, again, the solitude, but then also sort of how that solitude is offered in the great outdoors, getting in touch with nature, feeling the vastness of the universe, right? There's nothing will give you a sense, other than the stars maybe at night, nothing will give you a sense of just sort of the universe as a whole and how awe-inspiring it can be than the mountains, I think. And speaking of the stars, another cool thing about the mountains, being up in that altitude, is how many stars you can see. It's just amazing, at least on clear nights. And especially compared to if you live in a city like I do, especially a big city where it's seemingly you never see darkness. You never have silence. That's the other thing. There's always noise in these cities, right? You go out to the mountains, you can hear silence at times. Now, granted, you do hear nature as well, right? Wildlife and so on, the wind, right? But that's what you hear is nature. You don't hear any other artificial sounds. It's another thing that greatly appeals to me about being out there. You really do. Again, just where else can you get, especially if you're coming from the big city, where else can you sort of experience that kind of escape where you can experience, again, that kind of solitude and that sort of silence, right? The sound of silence. I really strangely yearn for that at times. And I feel like that overwhelms me psychologically sometimes. And so again, this really is kind of an escape. I think I need this. It benefits me. There's a reason why I feel like I've been drawn to this and head out there pretty routinely nowadays. And then I guess I'd finally mention, what else draws me to it. It's a workout. Naturally, it's a workout. I mentioned how I've really been sort of in a health kick, let's say the last 7 years of my life, 7-ish years of my life. And so these 14ers, they're no joke. They do offer quite a workout. And so that certainly appeals to me. I love the feeling of having done it. It can be so grueling and difficult. It reminds me of the experience after you go on a long run, running a marathon or a half marathon, or just putting in a really good workout. That feeling afterwards, where it doesn't matter what happens the rest of the day, you feel good because you accomplished something major. I love that sort of feeling that I get, and you get that from these 14ers because there are no easy 14ers. And I can speak to that, having done all the easy 14ers in Colorado. None of them are easy, and so you always have a significant feeling of accomplishment when you finish one. It really is. So that workout aspect of it, and then that sense of accomplishment related to having successfully finished the workout, that really appeals to me as well. So speaking of a workout, let's talk a little bit about how tough these actually are. First, let's get this out of the way. Winter ascents versus summer ascents. Totally different ballgame. Again, I'm going to be speaking to almost exclusively summer ascents. I have done a winter ascent, and I can speak to personally how different they are. Take everything about a summer ascent and take it times at least, let's say, 3 in terms of difficulty for winter. All the terrain, it's like 3 times harder to traverse because you're dealing with, what's the word? Drifts, right? Snow everywhere, 5 feet deep. Everywhere you're gonna navigate. You gotta avoid avalanche areas. So the terrain is more difficult to actually get through, and the route finding can be more difficult because you have to be much more careful and avoid these avalanche areas. And then not only that, so not only is the actual hiking up the mountain, I would say at least 3 times as difficult, but then you have to become way more prepared, which means, right, because of the elements that you could be exposed to and the various hazards, you have to literally pack more and come more prepared, which means then again, not only is it 3 times harder on the face of it to do that hike, but let's say your gear is 3 times heavier as well. So let's get that out of the way. Winter ascents versus summer ascents, not even in the same conversation. So let's throw winter ascents aside and talk more about the summer ascents. Okay. I guess real quick, the winter ascents, I'm probably done, and I'll talk more about this in the part 2 video when I talk about when I did my winter ascent of Mount Quandary. But I for sure can't envision myself doing another winter peak unless, for sure there's other people with me, because when I did it was solo. For sure other people, and probably not only other people, but probably experts or like residents, people who have experience specifically climbing in the winter, because it is completely different. So again, let's set aside the winter ascents and focus more on just the summer ones, and acknowledging how much more difficult winter ascents could be. So how difficult are these 14ers? Let's say you go out in July, right, and you do a summer ascent of one of these 14ers. Well, how difficult are they? Again, as the residents of Colorado are wont to say, there are no easy 14ers. And again, having personally been marking off all the easy 14ers, the class 1 14ers, I can speak to that as well. None of them are easy. They are all difficult. They will all, as I mentioned earlier, give you that sense of satisfaction when you finally get back to your car at the trailhead. You will feel a great sense of satisfaction. Having said that, I would say, having run a marathon now at this point in my life, I did that, I want to say a year and a half ago. I would say it's definitely easier than running a marathon. In my notes I have in probably a half marathon, but I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. I want to say maybe it's kind of equivalent to running a little bit more than a half marathon, at least in my mind. Again, not that they're anything remotely similar in terms of what you're actually doing, but the overall kind of how difficult they are, I would rate the marathon as certainly being more difficult. At least, again, these are all the 14ers I've done up to this point, so at least the ones I've experienced. I would certainly rank the marathon as being more difficult. And probably, I would even go as far as to say far more difficult. Maybe that's a reflection on me as a runner more than it is anything else. Who knows? So take that for what you will. But at least in my experience, these 14ers aren't as difficult as running a marathon, but they are certainly difficult. I would say, thinking about it a little bit more, I would say probably more difficult than, say, a half marathon, but not as difficult as a marathon. And what really kind of stands out really about the physical nature of these hikes and what's so demanding about them is it's not necessarily any one point in time, or that at any one point in time or particular moments in the hike that there's anything that's particularly physically demanding. At least, again, in my experiences, that hasn't been the case. Rather, these are grinds, and it's really, that's the aspect in which it's difficult. is the longevity of the experience and the duration of it, and over time how much that adds up, right? It's one thing to hike up and down a mountain for a mile or 2 miles or 3 miles or 4 miles or 5 miles or 6. It's another thing to do it for 14 miles, right? For 9 hours plus, right? So that's kind of a one way I would capture what it's like, right? It's not challenging in the moment by moment sense, but it's challenging in the sense that it's a grind, and over time the physical punishment really does accumulate. I would say that a lot of the difficulty is actually kind of mental or psychological as well. You're dealing with like false summits up here. Oftentimes, once you get kind of close, there are usually one or two false summits. In other words, you think you're close, that's got to be it. No, that's a false summit. In fact, you got another 500 feet to 1,000 feet to go. And that's only to the next false summit. And then you have another 1,000 feet, right? So that can be a mind game. It can be, if you get off the route, off trail, that can get a little scary, right? How do you get back? How do you get back on trail? Can you even find the trail, right? So at times, the mental challenges are really at least as intense at times as the physical challenges, I'd say. So that's interesting as well. Speaking to like the psychological challenges at times, the other thing that's kind of stuck out to me over time is the last portion of these hikes. That's really one of the more challenging. So I mentioned how the oxygen deprivation at the top, that's really challenging for me, but then also getting almost all the way back down, there's always this period, like the last mile or two, just never seems to end. You know it's close, and you always feel like you should be at the trailhead now. Where is it now? It's not. It's still not here. Why isn't it here? You can't believe how it just continues to go on and on and on. Was this trail really this long coming up? That happens over and over and over, and your feet are killing you, because also the descent, in many ways it's easier, but in some respects it's not, and your feet are taking a pounding, in particular going down, right? All that weight fighting the gravity, and your toes smashing into the front of your shoes. Your feet are killing you the last mile or two of these hikes. So that's really been pronounced for me too, is the last mile or two of the hikes are oftentimes a psychological sort of challenge for me. Okay. I want to talk a little bit. I mentioned like how 14ers.com, great site. Again, shout out to 14ers.com. So one of the things they do is they sort of classify all the different peaks, give them an overall classification in terms of how difficult they are. But they also then rank them in terms of these 4 major features or factors, okay, that give you then an idea of what to expect in terms of each particular peak. And I should say, so it's one thing to talk about a particular peak, but there are oftentimes many ways to get up to that peak. And sometimes, as will be the case when we get to the Sherman episode, Mount Sherman, sometimes you might end up at a trailhead, like a trailhead for a completely different trail than you intended, and end up climbing a completely different route to get to the peak than you originally intended. Right? So there are oftentimes several routes to get up to whatever peak you're talking about, right? And there's typically oftentimes a standard route, the one that is the most popular, let's say. But I think it is worth mentioning that the vast majority of the time there are usually various different routes that you can take. And these routes might, one might be class 1 and one might be class 3. And in fact, so Pikes Peak, I mentioned that. I actually took the non-standard route to get to ascend Pikes Peak about a month ago. And that's because the standard route, while it's a class 1, it's 24 miles long. And so you basically have to camp. You don't have to, but one of the things we'll get into is the weather and how you want to avoid that. And so, in view of that, a 24-mile route, you're probably going to have to camp at some point. I didn't want to mess with that. That wasn't an option. And so this alternate route was only 14 miles. It was a class 2, which I'm fine with, I'm comfortable with. and it was 10 miles shorter. So that's, I ended up doing this non-standard route to get up to then Pikes Peak. So wanted to point that out, that there are oftentimes several different trails getting up to the same then summit, right, for the same peak. But okay, so there's these different dimensions or factors that you can think of in terms of how to rate the difficulties associated with these various hikes. Right? So, think of it, for example, how demanding they can be in terms of like a commitment, right? So that's one of the things we'll talk about here in a moment, right? It's one thing to, like I was mentioning earlier, hike 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 miles, right, up and down the mountain. But then what about 14, 15, 16, 20, 24? That's a vastly different hike, right? So that's one aspect that you get into then, is this idea of commitment. But actually, before we get to commitment, let's talk about some of the other ones. So I'm actually going to read just verbatim. So this is all, again, from 14ers.com, just to give you an idea, again, of the specific factors that they take into account, at least, and that I like their system. I think it's a good way to, again, capture the different elements involved in these various hikes. So let's talk about the rating system then, and the factors to consider with these hikes. So first we have the notion of exposure. Okay? All of this is taken verbatim from 14ers.com, except I want to mention here at the outset, when it comes to exposure, there's actually another sense of exposure than the one that they're going to get into here. And that's that, right, being exposed to the weather. When you get above tree line, especially, you're vulnerable then to the weather elements, especially the higher up you get, especially then you oftentimes will ascend a ridge, right, to get then before your final ascent of the peak. And once you get up there, oftentimes you're at the top, then you can see down both sides, and the wind becomes a huge factor. It gets a lot colder up there. So there's exposure, not only in the sense that we'll get to in a moment, but in this other sense of being exposed to the weather and elements that the weather might, hazards that might be associated with the weather. And that is something that you oftentimes will hear associated with exposure then. But for the most part, when we talk about exposure, then what we mean is like something to do with heights, right? Being exposed to significant sort of drops and so on. So, again, this is verbatim from 14ers.com. Quote, exposure is the empty space below you which could result in injury or death if you fell. If you're afraid of heights, the exposure risk might be an important factor when selecting a route. And spoiler alert, I'm afraid of heights. I hate heights. And so naturally, this is the element of hikes about which I have the most concern and that I look into first when it comes to these various 14ers. Walking up the standard trail on Quandary Peak is a low exposure route. High exposure is crossing the knife edge on Capitol Peak. Extreme exposure is climbing the final wall when traversing from Crestone Peak to Crestone Needle. And so not only then do they, talk about these, what exposure is, but then they have a rating system for the exposure of each of the peaks then. And so they talk about what each of these classifications mean. So low exposure, mild exposure in the area, but not along the immediate route. So in other words, you might have some significant drops, but not where you need to go for the actual trail, right? They're usually far enough off, not going to be a big deal. Moderate, mild exposure, very close to the route. Route options may be limited, but you should be able to walk through the exposure area. And that's the extent of what I've dealt with, is moderate, right? That it's been somewhat close, but usually, I remember, here and there's been Sherman sticks out. There's been a time or two here and there where Elbert maybe, where, it was definitely kind of pushing it for me. But moderate's generally not going to be too significant, right? It's moderate. Considerable. Dangerous exposure along the immediate route. It should be avoidable with some slow hiking or scrambling. Then they have high. A fall could result in serious injury or death. Moving through the area will require some scrambling or short technical moves. Again, I'm not doing any of this, but there's even a classification above that, extreme, exclamation mark. A fall would likely be fatal, big sheer drops. I think a fall in high and considerable would probably be fatal in a lot of the circumstances too. But anyway, so that's low, moderate, considerable, high, extreme, and they kind of give descriptors for each of those. So that was exposure. Then we have rockfall potential. Another thing you got to factor in, right? Especially the more crowded these hikes are, or the more popular times, this is gonna be more of an issue, right? If you have the more climbers that are on this trail, the more likely they're gonna dig up, right, and make some rocks fall, right, on climbers below them. And that's not, it's not to say that other climbers are the only source of rock fall, right? It can happen naturally as well, but it also adds to the issue. Right? So we have rock fall potential. Quote, is there a risk of rockfall or instability along the route? Walking up a Class 1 trail would likely have a low rockfall risk, but climbing Maroon Peak or Little Bear Peak have high to extreme risk of dangerous rockfall. So then they again rate low, moderate, considerable, high, and extreme. Low, risk of rockfall is low either because the route is fairly low angle, in other words, not very steep, or the rock is very solid throughout. And so those are the two key factors, right, when it comes to the potential of rockfall. How steep is it? And then how solid is the actual rock that we're dealing with? Right? Is it really loose? Is it scree, right, where it's just a bunch of loose, almost gravel? That's terrible. Don't want to be dealing with that, Mount Sherman. Right? That's no good. And that's part of what is entailed by rockfall potential. Okay, so moderate. Rockfall is possible on steeper sections, but the route is generally stable. Most Class 2 routes fall into this category. Then you have considerable. Rockfall is likely on steeper sections. Wear a helmet. And so, again, I'm going to cap myself at more on this in a little bit, Class 2. Anything with equipment or needing specific technical move, I'm not going to be, at least I have no plans right now to mess around with that stuff. But so if you're dealing with considerable rockfall potential, you're going to need the helmet, is one of the things they mentioned. They also have a high classification. Rockfall is very likely, making the route quite dangerous. Climb in a small group, avoid other groups, and wear a helmet. And then extreme, exclamation mark. Rockfall is unavoidable, and the terrain is extremely loose. So that was rockfall potential. We also have the issue of route finding, the third major factor. So the question here is, how big is the risk of getting off route due to a lack of trail, confusing terrain, misplaced cairns, etc.? And I will say, this is something else that's 100 times worse in the winter because, again, you have snow drifts to deal with everywhere. Signs you might normally see in the summer are buried in snow in the winter, as I'll discuss more in the part 2 video when I discuss my ascent of Mount Quandary. So route finding, I've definitely appreciated this difficulty over the years as I've gained more and more experience with a lot of these 14ers. I've appreciated how difficult route finding can be, and before I forget, how this can be a lifesaver. Literally saved my life. Stay tuned for part 2. But not only on Quandary, right? You need a GPS tracker when you do this stuff. But even in my last hike, going down Pikes Peak in this non-standard trail, when you get in the forest, everything almost looks the same. And again, depending on how well marked the trail is and how established it is, at times it can be very difficult to stay the course. And there were points where I actually lost the trail then coming down on this last hike, and where I fortunately had my GPS, right, and I could see, okay, well, I'm off. That's how I would know, right, that I've gotten off. Need to go back this way. And there were times where I remember thinking, if I didn't look at this, I had no idea I had to go that far back this way. If I didn't have this GPS, I might have turned a little bit this way, but what are the odds I would have gone that far that way and actually gotten back on the trail, right? So these kinds of things all speak to the difficulties of route finding. So again, different classification levels, right? Low, naturally, route is easy to follow. Then you have moderate. Route may have some minor complications and or lack of trail, but it's mostly obvious. And I must say that I think their rating for the route finding on this Pikes Peak non-standard trail was, I want to say it was low, which, thinking back, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it should be at least moderate. But then you have considerable. Route has several areas which may be confusing, so you'll need to pay close attention to route features. Then there's high. Route is fairly complex and will require extra time for careful route finding. Some cairns may lead you in the wrong direction, and then it may be easy to get off route and enter dangerous terrain. So speaking of cairns, maybe you've heard of this, maybe you haven't. So see, another crappy marker. So these are just stacks of rocks that are invaluable when it comes to route finding. Let me tell you, especially in the dense forest areas, which are the bottom portions, and then especially at the top, when you're oftentimes trying to scramble up the final ascent, you have to oftentimes find particular paths because there's only certain ways to go to actually get up there. And so cairns could be incredibly useful then, right? As otherwise, where do you go? It all looks the same, right? And just jagged rocks poking out everywhere. So you got to look for the stack of rocks, and that'll point you in the right direction then in terms of the easiest and sometimes the only way to ascend then. Okay, so I think I mentioned high. So extreme exclamation mark route finding. Route is very complex with many confusing sections, requiring plenty of time for route finding so you don't get off route and into dangerous terrain. Plan ahead, read the route description carefully, and take experienced partners. So again, this route finding can be pretty tricky business. And then finally, another aspect of these climbs, I alluded to this at the get-go when I started getting into these different categories. One that I've really garnered an appreciation for is the sense of commitment. So again, the best way to capture this is take, for example, that 5 mile or 7 mile hike versus a 24 mile hike, right? That captures a sense of commitment. It's it's going to require a much greater sense of commitment to do a much longer hike. Also factor in maybe the ascent and how steep it is and how much elevation gain you get, right? What if maybe it's only 7 miles long, but you're gaining 5,000 feet of elevation? That can be a huge game changer, right? A huge factor that will increase the commitment needed dramatically. So as they describe it, what is commitment? How big is the commitment to get to the summit? Are there complex sections high on the mountain that require a lot of time on your ascent and descent? If so, the risk of getting caught in bad weather or without adequate supplies is higher. For example, Capitol Peak's standard route has been given an extreme commitment rating because once you're past K2 and working your way closer to the summit, there's no escape from the ridge, and you're a long way away from flat terrain and tree line. If weather rolls in when you're climbing high on Capitol, you're in trouble, and the only way back is via the same route, right? So that's another sense in which the commitment can be increased, right? Is that, as I was sort of suggesting earlier, that sense of exposure to the elements. How long for how much of a duration of the hike are you potentially exposed to nasty weather, right? Are you along a ridge for a significant period of time above tree line, right? That's no good if bad weather rolls in. So they're saying, right, that adds into the sense of commitment. Once you go for it, right, well then you better be ready, and you better be ready to book it back down if necessary. So they, again, classify these different categories of commitment. Low, the most difficult sections are short, okay, so there's not much of a commitment at all. Moderate, the more difficult sections are a bit longer and will require extra time. Considerable, the more difficult sections are longer and more frequent, requiring extra time. This may also slow your progress on your return, so you will need to watch the weather to allow enough time. Then there's high, due to the complexity and possible regain on your return. By the way, so what I mean by that is you're descending, right, and then you might have to reascend certain portions. That can be really tough psychologically too. If you have, right, on the ascent, maybe you go down a little bit and have to come back up. Anything like that is terrible, right? Hikers hate that because both ways, right? Because it stinks to have to go down and then regain any elevation. And on the way down, you don't really want to be dealing with having to go up it all again, right? You just went up the whole mountain. So yeah, regain, forgot what it's called when, the opposite happens as well, but that's what they mean by that. Okay, so high. Due to the complexity and possible regain on your return, you'll need a lot of extra time to climb the difficult sections of the route. Returning will also require extra time. Don't attempt this route if the weather may turn foul. So again, the worse the classification in terms of commitment, the more for a particular trail, the more you need to pay attention to the weather, right? Oftentimes. And then there's extreme exclamation mark. The distance, complexity, and lack of retreat options makes this the highest level of commitment for a 14er route. Do not attempt this route if foul weather is possible or you're not in adequate physical shape to return safely. You'll also need plenty of food and water. So, again, those are the classificatory, that's the classificatory system that 14ers.com employs to classify not the peaks per se, but the trails ascending the various peaks. And I think it does a good job, again, of capturing the various aspects that you will need to weigh and consider if you ever are going to try to tackle one of these 14ers. So I mentioned this a moment ago when discussing exposure, right? But, what is it that matters most to me and what don't I like? Exposure, heights. So in some sense, it's kind of weird that I got into climbing 14ers, climbing mountains, given that that's kind of really, I'm not afraid of that much that I can think of in life, but heights, they do give me, that feeling. Or if I watch a video of like somebody doing work on a extremely tall tower, or those daredevils doing, climbing the skyscrapers, I'm the type that will, my own hands will start to sweat watching those videos. So that's the number one thing for me. What matters is the exposure. How big of a factor on a particular trail is the exposure. So if there's more than, say, moderate, I'm probably not even entertaining it. And so in general, my plan is to try to conquer all the class 2 peaks, class 1 and class 2. And in general, those aren't going to entail, none of the class 2 peaks will entail any exposure that's more than moderate. So speaking of the classes then, 14ers.com, they have 7 of the Colorado 14ers, and here they have 58 listed. I can't remember what I said earlier for the number, but the number that they have classified as class 1 is 7, but I have to say one of those is Mount Elbert, and I don't remember Mount Elbert being that easy, relatively speaking, compared to at least some of the others I did. So that's curious to me. Mount Bras, descending Mount Bras was fairly, there's some scree, and the descent was interesting. But otherwise, these class 2 ones, they have Democrat, Cameron, Bras, and Lincoln. I mention all those because they call it Decalibron. These 4 are so close you can do them all in one day, and I did. But they have those ranked as class 2, and I would say those are all fairly easy, other than, as I was mentioning, the descent on the very last one, Bras. That was pretty gnarly. But otherwise, I thought all those were fairly easy. So, whether they're class 1 or class 2, I think a lot of them are probably interchangeable. But in general, my point was I'm probably not going beyond class 2. Then they differentiate between class 2 and difficult class 2. So I don't imagine, I have no plans of going beyond just regular class 2, which is 33. So I still have 20 more to go just within those classes. So I think I'll be doing good for a while. And again, that's just, I'm not going to box myself in necessarily, right? Who's to say what's to come and what the plans will be as the future unfolds. But for right now, I'm perfectly content, right, with the plan of conquering the class 1 and class 2 14ers in Colorado, all 33 of them, right? Not including the difficult class 2s. Or how do they put it? Difficult class 2. Okay. Oh, I wanted to say a little bit about the wildlife on these 14ers and on these hikes. Just going to Colorado in general, you're going to experience wildlife. That's one of the really cool aspects of the state. And then on these hikes, you're definitely going to experience your fair share of wildlife. No bears yet for me. And I think that's probably because, again, you do these 14ers in the summer. They're they're popular. They're travel enough that they're probably, the bears probably for the most part stay away. That's not to say that there aren't bears on these trails, but I haven't seen any. You do see lots of marmots, mountain goats. Man, I see seemingly mountain goats every hike. Marmots as well. Those are pretty much a given. And the other thing I would mention is the wildlife. It seems to just be used to you. Probably again because they're along these trails. Habituation. They're used to the people then, right? But it's just crazy how they'll come just like right by you. Stay tuned. You'll see someone where they just go right next to you, no fear of you. And which one was it? Grays and Tories, I think, where I thought that they were actually going to get somewhat aggressive because there was a point where, and I'll say much more about it when we get to that video, but there really wasn't any way, given how the trail was at that point and the sheer cliffs on the side, there was like, I couldn't go anywhere else, they couldn't go anywhere else, and it seemed like, they were with the young ones. And it seemed like a couple of the bigger ones were getting kind of aggressive, and they ended up going down like a sheer cliff. I could not believe how these goats go down. It's just amazing how they can descend seemingly impossible sheer cliffs. But yeah, the wildlife is another aspect of, I guess part of nature, right? But another aspect of these hikes that is just awesome. That you'll definitely get to see a lot of little ground squirrels, huge birds. You'll hear, lots of ravens, crows, just lots of different, lots of different cool flowers and just kind of maybe bugs and stuff at times and weird things you don't see anywhere else. So yeah, that kind of stuff certainly stands out as being one of the cool, again, aspects of these hikes as well. What are the people like? I want to mention real quick, in general, what the people seem to be like. And that is, they seem to be super friendly. And I can't help but think back when I was growing up, there was like this caricature of Colorado and what the people were like in Colorado. And it's kind of weird to think back on now, but a lot of that was based on the college football rivalry, at least it was in terms of what I heard. And anyway, the upshot was there was a huge bitter rivalry between the Huskers, Nebraska Huskers, and Cornhuskers, and Colorado Buffaloes. And I just remember how, again, probably due in large part, as bad as it is, to this just stupid college football rivalry, but the depiction you would get of Colorado people was they're selfish and they're jerks and so on, right? That's at least what I remember growing up. Fast forward, actually going to Colorado myself, on all these subsequent trips, it couldn't be further from the truth. Like, at least the people you encounter, no, in general, honestly, in the mountains, not just the people you encounter on the trails, but in general, everyone seems super friendly. I honestly can't even remember encountering anyone in Colorado that was remotely close to someone I would call a jerk. Like, it's almost uncanny how friendly everyone is. So that definitely stands out, and that's particularly palpable on these trails as well. Then, certainly no exception. Probably even more pronounced, I would say, on the trails. Everyone is, they're so motivated, and the other aspect is everyone is encouraging everyone else. I love that facet of it as well. So that's kind of part of being, super friendly is you don't have much longer to go. Keep going. You're almost there. You'll encounter, these are little people, by the way. I don't know how well you can see them, but you encounter people here and there as you're going down, going up, and, you might ask, what's it like coming up, yada, yada, yada. And without fail, though, everybody that you encounter, they'll just be super encouraging. You can do it. This little part's tricky, but once you get past that, smooth sailing. There's so much encouragement. Just in general, very, very friendly people. That is definitely one thing that stands out. And then the other thing, not surprisingly, I guess, that I would say about the people that you encounter on these trails is that they're super fit. They are, if they're, again, that makes sense, right? You're going to be taking on the challenge of a 14er, unless you're stupid, right? You better have some, you better be in a somewhat decent shape. Okay? Otherwise, it's, what are you doing? It's a joke, right? You have to be in somewhat decent shape. So, again, no surprise then that a lot of the people you meet, if not everyone, seems to be in great shape. So those are two things I would say that I've kind of noticed the most about the people you encounter on the trails. Right, the two things that again that stand out the most is just how friendly they are and how fit they are. A couple kind of points about general etiquette. Again, these are just some of the things I've gleaned over the past few years at least. Everyone usually stops, in my experience, to chat a little bit. Not as you get way to the top and then there's people, at the summit, not necessarily up there, although you'll chat with the people up there as well. But, as you're going up and down, because it's not like a steady stream of people. Like you see, for example, what is it? These really famous, mountains. You see like chains of people climbing the rope, and one by one all the way to. No, that's not how it is. While they are popular trails, you'll still go long periods of time, in between seeing people, right? And so when you do see them, generally, in my experience, people tend to stop, not for like 10 minutes, but people tend to stop and exchange a few words. They might say again what to expect, things they've encountered, how's the weather up there, all sorts of things. But in my experience, people tend to stop for a few minutes and exchange some conversation. In my experience, descenders, there's no, I guess, like sort of unwritten rule about this per se, at least that I know of. But in my experience, the descenders, the people going down, generally tend to get over right when you encounter, say, somebody coming up when you're going down. The people going down tend to get over and let the people go up, continue to go up. Not always, and it's not like this is a big issue, right? Where it's like, oh, are you gonna go? No, right? That never happens. It's usually, somebody's. Most of the times, one of the two parties is ready for a break, and so they'll just naturally get over and take a break, and then the other one just keeps going down or up, whatever the case might be. But in general, I guess I have noticed on a whole, right, if nobody's taking a break, the person going down tends to like kind of get over and let the one going up continue. I have noticed, this you do have a very fond appreciation of the outdoors, right? And, on behalf of the residents, and then also the people that tend to do these climbs or these trails, and so you'll see signs to this effect too. But basically, pack it in, pack it out. That's an expression you'll hear. Whatever you take with you, you better take back out, right? Take with you back off the trail, back out of there. General rule of thumb. And also the sentiment, kind of leave the trail better than how you found it. Right? Not that that's necessarily possible or realistic, but you get the idea, right? Leave it as it was at the very least, right? Don't make it obvious that you've been there, right? It shouldn't be, in theory or ideally, the idea is, right? General etiquette is, you won't leave any evidence, right? There won't be any evidence that you've been there after you've gone up and down the trail, right? If you're doing what you should, right? You are packing again away all your waste, taking that away. We'll get into my pack here in a little bit, but you have to bring toilet paper and so on, and a bag for trash. Any trash you might accumulate, take it out naturally. Okay, so again, pack it in, pack it out, and leave the trail better than you found it. Speaking of which, stick to the trail as well. That is something I guess maybe that's something that rookies might not necessarily know from the outset, but that you will definitely learn to appreciate, if for no other reason, because you'll see signs. People won't necessarily yell at you if you get off the trail, but you will see lots of signs, right? Stick to the trail, and talking about how it doesn't take long for you to completely ruin the vegetation and the land and whatever grows there, and then it'll speak to the signage, will speak to how long it takes for that vegetation to regrow. And so the whole point being, stick to the designated trails. I would like to. Oftentimes you're thinking, well, I'd like to if I can only find where it is, right? But in general, stick to the trail, at least when it's obvious, right? And don't go off, again, because they want to try to preserve the great outdoors in its natural state as much as they can. I should give a shout out to, what is it, the 14ers Initiative? There's some group out there that does a really good job of maintaining these trails. You'll see them up, I would say about half of my hikes, again, 13 overall at this point. I'd say about half of them, say 6 or 7, I've seen members of this 14ers initiative. They'll have helmets on and they'll be on the trail somewhere doing work. And it's amazing to me how they get all this equipment up there. They obviously know what they're doing, and just again how fit they are and how they're able to do all this complicated work, on the side of mountains. So kudos to them, and I do appreciate, as do I think many of the climbers, right? The people that enjoy doing these 14ers, we appreciate all the work they put into maintaining these trails. And I guess in general, right? I would say, don't be noisy and don't be a jerk, right? Those are kind of given, but I would say I have gotten annoyed when you might go by somebody who just has a speaker that's blaring. I mean, not super loud. I've never had anybody where it's like literally blaring, but I don't want to hear their music as they walk by. And that's happened once or twice, where it's not in headphones, it's like, a speaker. And again, not a huge deal, not the end of the world, but not something I'm a big fan of. Okay, let's move on. So that was a bunch of my general reflections. I think we covered the gamut in terms of them. So let's move on then to the next section where I will dive into then what the day of a hike looks like. So I've got it planned out. I know I'm hiking, assuming the weather checks out, tomorrow morning. Well, what's that morning and what's the subsequent day then look like, the day of the hike? So again, let's get this out of the way. Summer versus winter, completely different, right? We're going to be talking about just summer hikes, pretty much, right? What you're packing, amongst other things, completely different, right? So I wanted to mention that at the outset. Okay, what you're packing, how much you're packing, that would be completely different summer versus winter. And I had, for example, going up Quandary, I had to have snowshoes, and these are the ones I had, literally on Quandary. These are them, and these are the trekking poles, bent and all. Again, stay tuned for the Quandary episode or video. That's going to be doozy. But then we have, all this stuff is winter stuff, micro spikes. You put these on the bottom of your boots. Well, I didn't even bring my winter boots to show you here, but completely different set of boots for the winter. And then you have to oftentimes put these on. And so then these will dig into, if you're going up or down ice. And even in summer, fair number of times, if you're doing summer hikes, you still have to worry about patches of ice. So this Pikes Peak one, there were actually a few patches. They weren't very long, but there were, I want to say, 2 or 3 patches where you have to go on pretty much ice because there's still snow there. And on the trail, when it's the trail, people beat it down. It gets really hard packed then and turns into ice. And so even in the summer, sometimes you might throw these on. I usually don't bring these unless I read like a trail report where somebody says they're definitely useful. I tend to not otherwise pack these. But something else that, again, in the winter at least, all kinds of other stuff then you're going to have to throw in there, like all kinds of more, clothing. I had to put in, what's the word, like basically a little emergency tent. This is the much bigger pack. I talked earlier about, how much more weight you're going to be carrying. The other fun thing is, it's great to have all this equipment. And then it's another thing to try to get into it, with 5 feet of snow everywhere around you. When you take a step and you fall in, you try to, anytime you move, right, to try to adjust and get into your pack, you fall into snow in a different angle. The other weird thing that I'll get more into again when we talk about Quandary is around the trees. You have to be very careful because you could have even, it can be deceptive and you can fall in. It can actually be much steeper drifts that go down, and people get stuck then next to trees sometimes, again, because of the snow. So lots of various elements that make, again, packing and getting ready for the day of a winter hike that make it a completely different conversation than these summer hikes. So let's get back on track and talk exclusively about summer hikes then. What does that look like? What's the day of a hike look like? Well, you're going to be starting early to avoid the clockwork storms that come in the afternoon. So, I mean, actually, it's not necessarily clockwork, but in Colorado, it's pretty regular. Basically, so regular that as a rule of thumb, you want to try to have summited and be coming down, at least it's my rule of thumb, by noon. Because around 2 o'clock, if not earlier, maybe a little bit later, that's when the storms hit. For whatever reason, given the dynamics and the circumstances and the layout of the mountains and how the weather systems work and so on and so forth, that's just how the weather is. You often get afternoon storms. And so in view of that, right, because it happens with such a degree of regularity, then you need to plan accordingly. And so that means getting an early start. So by that, I mean, again, early enough where you can get to the trailhead and then get started, and to the point where then you can have summited and begin your descent by, this seemingly never happens, or oftentimes doesn't happen, but by noon. So yeah, that's the first thing I'd mention is you're planning on getting an early start. You're being me in all of my experiences. I also mentioned that the importance of a good breakfast. And so I'm one who, over the years, it's just who I am. I don't typically eat until like noon. I really don't. But for me, day of a hike, that's completely different. I will eat a good breakfast. I'll force myself because I never am really hungry that early, but I'll still force myself to eat as robust of a breakfast as I can, especially in view of the fact that for whatever reason, it's extremely difficult. I find it extremely difficult to eat on the hike itself. I have so much trouble. It's actually difficult just to drink. Eating, there's seemingly nothing I want to do less than eat. Even when I feel kind of hungry on these hikes, without fail, like it's a challenge to actually eat. Like chewing is difficult, and like it's always hard to eat. And so in view of that, I always prep myself by eating as big and good of a breakfast as I can. And just sort of a related point, this last Pikes Peak hike, I had plenty of granola bars and various food and snacks in my pack, ready to go. But all I ended up eating was a few carrots and grapes the entire time, and that was a 14-mile hike. So like literally probably like 15 carrots maybe and like 25 grapes. Not even, I was trying to estimate the number of it. A handful of carrots and grapes, and that's all I could eat the entire hike. So again, I've learned to appreciate this through experience, and so I will prep for it as best I can by eating not only a really good breakfast the morning of, but also eating lots typically the night before. It kind of reminds me of what I do. So I play hockey here, probably the subject of a future episode in this series. And most of my games are on Sundays, and I'll oftentimes sub for a lot of different teams. And these hockey games is very much a workout. I'll sweat more in one hockey game than I do after a 6-7 mile run. And so, again, it reminds me a lot how I sort of eat the night before a hike is similar to, eating before hockey Sundays. Like Saturday night, I'll usually eat a pretty big dinner and fill up quite a bit because then I just know how many calories I'm going to go through the next day. Well, the same sort of deal happens. I'll prep myself, try to eat quite a bit the night before a hike, and then do the best I can to eat a really good breakfast the morning of the hike. So I want to talk about, so then you have to get to the trailhead, right? And so that's going to require a highway, usually, then to get to a more secluded county highway / trailhead road, which gets real interesting. And so no matter what car you are driving, you're going to have to deal with that for a little bit. And what typically happens, at least on a lot of them, is you will get to then, your road will get you to a certain point, or the road will, and there's usually like a little lot there, and the idea is everybody but four-wheel or all-wheel drive should stop here. But then the road typically will go up a little bit, and it gets dramatically worse. But what will often happen, though, is it'll go another mile or two up. So the whole upshot here is, well, I don't have four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, and so what oftentimes happens then, in view of all this, is that I will have to stop or me and my climbing partners will have to stop at the original place. We don't typically go up, the four-wheel part of the road, four-wheel drive part of the road. And so we'll have to add on then. Oftentimes you'll have to add on miles then, because this can be where you can get with four-wheel drive versus all other cars. That can be oftentimes a couple miles at least. So again, you're going both ways. There was one of them, I can't remember, was that Grays and Tories, where there was something similar to this, and Jamie and somebody gave us, sometimes you might hitch a ride, going up or down. Somebody will be nice. Because oftentimes what will happen then is you'll have to park down here if you don't have four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive. And a lot of times the trail will be going up the road, up the four-wheel drive road. And so, again, sometimes you'll be fortunate and somebody will give you a ride. But not always. I'd say maybe I think that's only happened once or twice, and there, out of all the times I've done this, and almost every time there is this sort of dynamic where seemingly almost every time you could drive a little bit further if you have a four-wheel or all-wheel drive vehicle. I don't, and so I'm always tacking on, 1, 2, 3, 4 extra miles. And these roads are treacherous sometimes, like I said. And again, the further up you go, the worse they get. And actually, that's one of my biggest fears sometimes. And not only am I trying to get down to avoid weather, but in terms of like myself and my personal safety, I guess it's all personal safety here. But like, there's also the worry of having to get to my car then and get off this crappy mountain road as well, right? Because again, these are very narrow roads filled with all kinds of potholes and huge rocks. And oh my God, if you run into someone else going the other way, good luck, right? And then that gets even more dire, again, the further up you go. So yeah, navigating those roads can be real interesting. So let's talk real quick about what I usually start off wearing. The weather, as I intimated earlier when I talked about Colorado weather, it's generally about, you can kind of sort of, what to expect. Not that it can't be different here and there, but in general, it's a little bit cooler in the morning. So we're looking at maybe 30, 40 degrees when you wake up. It might be 5:30. You got to get, your breakfast going. You want to get on the road and get to the trailhead maybe by 7:30, the latest, hopefully. But at that point, it's still pretty cool, right? And it's only going to be colder up, higher on the peak. But of course, it's going to take you hours before you get there. So anyway, the whole point is I'm probably starting off in something like this. Now, I run a little hotter probably than most people. That's changed a lot since I've lost weight. Actually, that's changed dramatically since then. This is what I tend to start off in, and I will say that I almost always wear shorts, even though it's going to be maybe 30, 40 degrees even when you get in the summit. I still am fine. My legs, I find, hardly ever get cold. It's just the upper body that might be constantly changing, short sleeve, long sleeve, throwing on a jacket, taking it off, constantly changing that, but I'm pretty much always good in shorts. So I'll start off, because it's a little cooler, right, to begin with, in the morning, probably start off in this. There's my hat, right? You have merino wool. Merino wool, I swear by this. Once you start hiking, you will appreciate merino wool, how warm it keeps you. I always have these, so I'll have these for my socks. I'll have an extra pair in my pack, and then I'll have my boots, which I'll get into more here in a moment. I'll probably an hour or two into the hike, you'll be getting a little higher up, so you might be losing temperature in that sense, but you're fast forwarding through the day though, the sun's getting up, and so in general it's starting to get a little warmer probably. So I might switch into one of these short sleeve ones for a while. But that'll change then when you get up to the ridge. Oftentimes about the middle of the hike, okay, these are just general rules of thumb. You'll hit a ridge and then start ascending that ridge oftentimes. But when you get up there, hello wind, hello decrease of temperature. So you might be throwing on the long sleeve shirt again. You might be changing hats and putting on one of these bad boys, right? Let's do that. Whatever the case might be, the gloves. Oh, I have made the mistake of forgetting gloves. That is not a mistake I ever want to make again. because these can help dramatically gripping, right? And not only that, but the temperature, right? Keeping your hands warm. That's a huge deal. So gloves, you're definitely putting those on probably periodically, especially the higher up you are. You're putting your hat on, probably your stocking cap as you get, gain that ridge and you're approaching the final summit. You're definitely starting to get a little bit cooler, but at the same time, it's been a workout, so you're also probably sweating quite a bit. So your body is producing a lot of heat as well. And I will say that like sweat and water and moisture is your big enemy. So you want some sort of material, not cotton. Right? I like this 32-degree company, a material like this that'll wick away the moisture, the sweat. That's what you want to be wearing in general. So without exception, that's what I'll be wearing. And you want to avoid, right? So if you're sweating, right, that can be no good. Or if you get wet from rain, right, that could not likely, right? But if you get stranded somewhere, hypothermia, that becomes more of an issue, right, when you're dealing with something, being wet. So just wanted to throw that out there too. That is something you think about. Yeah, so that's kind of what I start wearing and kind of how I might change my clothes throughout the hike as it goes on. Again, completely different than the winter hike. Have on my goggles the whole time. You'll see this stuff, and a huge winter coat the whole time. Completely different. There's a lot more change. If it rains, I've only had it actually rain on me once on the descent. I want to say it was Albert or Huron. And put on a rain jacket. You have that. But otherwise, I'm mainly in just one long sleeve shirt or one short sleeve shirt and shorts, merino wool socks, and then I will mention boots. These boots, right? This is arguably the most important aspect of your gear, whether it's something you're packing or wearing. Cannot talk enough about the import of good hiking boots. It reminds me a lot of, I mentioned hockey, there's been some parallels here, but how significant and important your skates are in hockey. How much that was the single most dramatic difference I felt, playing hockey ever, was when I bought new, better skates. So the first pair I bought were used. They were, I didn't know anything about hockey skate sizing, and I just bought the same size skates that I had for shoes. And actually, hockey, for whatever reason, skates, they run like 2 to 2.5 sizes smaller. So I bought size 13 when I should have gotten size 10 or 10.5. And so needless to say, they were like skis on me. I would bottom out. The material was terrible as well. So anytime I would turn on these skates, I would bottom out. It was just awful. Then I fast forward, I take the plunge. I realize I'm going to be playing hockey for a while, and I take the plunge and invest in much more expensive and better skates, and it made such a huge difference. Skate where the material, you can't even move it. It's so, strong and durable versus the flimsy material I had to begin with in the first set of skates. Just made so much difference. Well, so too, the whole point here is experience the same thing when it comes to hiking boots. I certainly have come to appreciate how important getting a good set of boots is if you're going to be doing this more than once. So I started off, not that these were terrible, but this is my first set of boots I had, but they weren't great either. I lost toenail. That was after Sherman. There was a few wrinkles in Mount Sherman, so look forward to that video as well. And actually the toe. So I mentioned how when you're going down these mountains on the descent, boom, 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 your foot's just constantly right going into the front. So it's not surprising then that your toes get damaged a bit. And actually the toenail didn't end up falling off for like another 3 weeks later. But anyway, more on that when we get to the Sherman video. But so boots are extremely important. I took up the plunge like I did with skates and ended up just getting a really nice pair. These are La Sportivas. I got on them, especially usually, you look around, do your shopping, you can find a pretty good pair that's probably on sale somewhere. And that's what I did. These bad boys have, you can't even tell I was just thinking about this earlier. You almost can't even tell they've been used really. And these have been through I think I've had these a couple of years now. So they've probably been on with me on 2/3 at least of my hikes, and they are almost like you can't even really tell that they are worn that much from the outside. So they have done really well in terms of being durable. So yeah, can't talk enough about how important it is to get a good pair of boots, because again, think about not only that constant impact, you want to have a good, durable, but comfortable boot, but then also, waterproof, being a good boot in terms of the elements, right? Is it going to protect you should it rain and so on? And how good of a grip does it have on the rocks and in mud and so on? So boots are extremely important. Certainly learned to appreciate the importance and significance of boots over the years. So, what am I packing exactly? Let's get into that a little bit. Definitely too much at first, and I think that's probably, reflecting on that a bit, that's probably true of a lot of hikers. They probably start off overpacking. And you know what? I was thinking about this. It's probably better to overpack than underpack, right? Better to have what you need, maybe too much, right? Too many things, but at least have what you need when you need it, than to not have it when you need it. But at the same time, I don't know, because weight's a big thing, and these hikes are already difficult, and when you're adding weight, that's a significant factor, right? That really does make the hike that much more difficult. So if you can eliminate weight, you really do get to appreciate that sort of dichotomy. If you can eliminate weight at all, that's going to just make your hike that much easier. And so that dichotomy of weight and being prepared versus less weight, right, and having an easier sort of hike but being less prepared, that's the tension certainly there, and I can appreciate that tension. But I've certainly, over the years, I feel like I've become, I've packed less and less. Not to say that I don't pack what I think I need, always safety first. But one example would be what I mean here is back in the day, I would always just pack a first aid kit, no matter what. Whereas now, as long as somebody in my party has a first aid kit, I don't think it's necessary that we each have one. Again, in the summer on these 14ers, which are relatively popular, right? It would be totally different. I would have a totally different philosophy if it were a different hike somewhere else that was much more secluded, right? But in general, given the dynamics of these hikes, I don't think you need more than one first aid kit. I've never needed to use a first aid kit on one of these hikes, but obviously it could happen. So I still ensure that at least one member of the party has a first aid kit. But let's say I'm going with Dan and Josh. I think just one first aid kit amongst us is fine. If things get dire, there will be other hikers coming up and down at some point to help us. And what that does then, if only Josh has to pack the first aid kit, well then I can carry more water or something like that. So then he has to carry, I'll carry more of the water. He carries less of the water. Then overall, again, you're decreasing weight, which is, in some sense, that is a facet of safety as well, right? Because if you're carrying less, you're going to have better form, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's going to have safety ramifications as well. So I do think that that's something that I've gained an appreciation for, is kind of packing less and paying more attention to, being darn sure you need whatever it is you're putting in this pack, because it's adding weight, and these hikes are already difficult, and you don't need any more weight. So I tend to pack less over time. I do stick to the essentials. I try to anyway, right? So you need food, you need water. I will say Gatorade. I don't generally drink Gatorade except after a really hot and humid run. I referenced that here in the heat in Kansas. It's really hot and humid. I'll come home and have to drink Gatorade. But then also in Colorado, on these hikes, I will drink Gatorade. Other than that, I never drink Gatorade. I don't drink these sports drinks in general, but they are immensely important, I feel like, on these hikes. They definitely help. And so I'll pack typically 2 or 3 bottles of water, let's say, and then a couple, say 20 ounce things of Gatorade. And that's it. You're looking at, let's say, 5 to 9 hours usually these hikes are taking. Okay. Again, general rule of thumb. So you need some food, some water, right? But one thing, again, going back to the packing less and less and less, I've certainly scaled the food and water that I pack back over the years. Because I referenced earlier, I'll pack it, but then actually coming to eat and drink it is a whole nother ballgame too, because for whatever reason, it is extremely difficult. I find it extremely difficult to try to eat or drink anything on these hikes, especially eating. I already talked about that though, so but just another reason why I pack a little bit less is because I can't actually. It's difficult for me to actually eat on these hikes. I guess I would say then the other thing that's definitely important is sunscreen. So you don't think about the sun necessarily, especially if you're a rookie. Right there it is. Especially since if you're a rookie, it seems cooler. It's not super hot. It's not hot and humid like it is in Kansas City, for example. But that can be deceptive because you're still at the same time you're way closer to the sun, right? Think about how high up you are. So you're that much close to the sun, and the upshot then is you can get burned a lot easier. So, I will definitely put on the sunscreen, and importantly for the lips too. Those are, you need to make sure because they're even higher up, right? They're even more susceptible to them getting the sun, and so you need to make sure that you bring sunscreen in general, but also for lips. And one thing it was really odd previewing Quandary again, the winter ascent, was getting a sunburn in my mouth. It was really weird. And what happened was the sun was reflecting off the snow. And so when I finally got home that night, the weirdest thing was so I was so hungry, but I couldn't eat because my mouth hurt so bad. It was burned. And so like every swallow was like excruciating. So I don't know what you do for that. I don't know how you can't put like sunscreen in the back of your throat. So that was really interesting and certainly not something I was expecting to get sunburned in the roof of your mouth. Okay, so anyway, definitely want to pack the sunscreen, like I said. So let's talk a little bit about what the hike is generally like. So talk about preparing. We're getting there. We're getting an early start, and we're generally at the trailhead. If you're me, you're probably at the crappy vehicle trailhead and not the four-wheel drive trailhead. So you've trekked up here, and the first third of the hike is usually, again, not always, and this is one thing that'll stand out about Mount Bierstadt, the first one, the subject of the next video, was that it wasn't really like this. But usually what will happen is you're usually hiking through dense forest for, like, let's say the first third of the hike, right? Until you get, these are trees, by the way, until you get up to tree line, you're going back and forth, switchbacks, generally up a dense forest, and then until you hit tree line, which is, let's say, roughly, I don't know, 11,200. All right, so that for me, that kind of has the first kind of feel for the hike, right? That's like phase one. Typically, is you're starting in a dense forest, and it could be challenging in terms of route finding, like I talked about earlier. So yeah, that's usually, and it's a little warmer typically because you're not as high up yet. But then again, I guess at the same time, the trees are blocking a lot of the sunlight as well. But so anyway, there's that aspect of the climb. But then you'll get above tree line, and then it's kind of like I guess the middle third, if you will, of the hike. Then is like approaching then, let's say, a ridge above tree line, and then approaching the ridge. And oftentimes I would say this is maybe, I don't know if I want to necessarily say this, but it seems like maybe the easiest because you're not trying to find your way through this dense forest, and you're not dealing with typically what's a steeper final ascent with lots of scrambling and rocks and stuff. So it can tend to be maybe the easiest portion, this middle third, until you gain that ridge. And then usually, again, you're not always necessarily gaining a ridge. And what I mean by a ridge is like, again, you're getting to this point where you can kind of see over the other side, right? So there you have one side, and then you're finally seeing over kind of the other side. And a lot of times then there'll be this ridge in between two summits, right? And so you're climbing and gaining that ridge in between them. right? And then you're going to ascend up the 14er then. Well, that at that point, I would say it kind of demarcates, let's say, the final third, right? The last third, the final phase of the hike, and it's, you might say, the most difficult. Typically, you have more exposure in both senses, right? That weather, you're going to be blasted with wind. Wait till you see the Quandary videos in the winter with just the sheer wind. And that's the thing with Quandary, like the whole climb is almost just on a ridge. Like the forest part's a lot less, and you gain the ridge a lot quicker, and then it's just the ridge almost the whole way. So you're fighting that wind almost the entire time up. But yeah, so once you get in the ridge, you're facing the wind and then also lowering temperatures, right? And so weather, right? You're exposed to the weather a lot more. And then also, as I intimated earlier, it tends to be getting steeper at this point too. So you oftentimes will have more exposure in that sense as well. You have to be more careful about your path and avoid certain paths because of the exposure involved. So it's also getting steeper, like I said. And then whereas you were probably walking, for the most part, just on your two legs, right? It might be a little bit steep. You're going up a mountain after all. But at this point, especially as you get closer and closer, the whole point here is you might then have to start doing some scrambling where you're using your hands, right? And having to kind of take big steps up on rocks and then kind of figure out your next rock and go here. And right, you're using your hands more. Oftentimes that's the case up here. And then you finally will, hopefully, right, hit the summit. Okay, but there's usually, some scrambling involved in the last little pitch before the final summit. Okay, I think that's all I want to say there. Oh, so, piggybacking on, again, the last third, what's especially problematic or difficult about it, never mind all those other factors, is the altitude. So going back to that, now that's becoming much more of a factor, right? Because you're gaining significant elevation at this point. So you are breathing less. It feels like you're able to breathe less and less and less and less oxygen, right? So that is a huge facet and huge issue. In fact, I would say, again, that is the biggest hurdle for me. And it doesn't matter typically. I will take maybe, let's say, 1 or 2 breaks all the way up. And this was the case for Pikes Peak, my most recent one, right? I only took like 1 or 2 breaks till about this point, and then it's like 30 breaks because you reach 12,000, 13,000 feet. It just doesn't matter, again, how good of shape you're in. If you're not acclimated to the altitude, if you're not living there, if you're not a resident, good luck with that oxygen, right? Good luck with that altitude. I couldn't help it. I could only go a couple hundred feet, right? And I'd have to take a break. So literally 1 or 2 breaks for the first 3 hours. And then that last, hour, I'm taking a break every few minutes. It's that impactful. It makes that much of a difference. It really is that significant. So yeah, I can't hammer home that point enough, just how much of an issue that lack of oxygen is once you get kind of up there. To the point where when I summit, it's like, oftentimes I'm like, I just want to go back down because I'm just so ready to breathe regularly again. And that's kind of true of my trips in general. After a while of being in Colorado, I took a 6-day trip earlier, and I'll take another 6-day trip next week. I'm ready to get back, not because I don't like Colorado, but because I'm ready to breathe normally. The oxygen it's that noticeable. And so again, I can't even imagine trying to summit some of these 20,000 foot peaks. It's just unimaginable to me. So coming down, so you finally summited. Hopefully you can take some time to appreciate it. Again, I oftentimes find myself having to remind myself, enjoy it, right? Because you're so focused on paying attention to the weather, making decent time, right? Paying attention to all these other factors and so on and so forth. But hey, look where I am, right? You got to remind yourself, take a look at the views, appreciate being on top of the mountain, right? So every now and then I have to, again, remind myself of that. But again, hopefully you've summited, You've spent some time on the peak. Of course, now it's time to get back down. As a general rule of thumb, the descent is, much faster. Let's say twice as fast, but not always. Excuse me. That varies quite a bit, or not varies quite a bit, but that can vary. Going back to my last hike, that was actually one of the things that sort of played into the psychological difficulties of the last portion of the hike for me, was that I was expecting the typical much quicker descent. Right. Well, that's only true, if again, in general, it's true given a certain sort of steepness or elevation gain, right? That it's going to be, let's say, twice as fast getting down. But what happened though was Pikes Peak, it wasn't near as steep. It was a lot longer route, but it was the same elevation gain over time, right? So whereas most of them, let's say, are like this, maybe more like this. And so the whole point is, the steeper the ascent is, the quicker the ratio will be of the descent versus the ascent. And the flatter the trail is overall, and that's what Pikes Peak was basically a really long, not that it was flat, but right, it wasn't super steep. It was just it was a long, grueling, lengthy trail, but it wasn't as steep, and so then it doesn't affect, right, the timing won't be as different. If it's not as steep, the difference won't be as much between the ascent and the descent, right? Because the steepness is what affects, right, the how fast or quickly you can ascend or descend. So hopefully that came across, right? And so I was expecting, the whole point was, with respect to Pikes Peak, I was expecting to then get down in half the time that it took me to get up. And so I was like stoked. I was making really good time. And then, when I reached about the time period that I was expecting to have got back to the trailhead, and I realized, wait, I'm not near as close as I thought I'd be at this point. It was very demoralizing. And then it dawned on me why that was. Well, I was expecting, this typical trajectory and steepness and elevation gain, but that wasn't the case. This was a different kind of route. So, but in general, though, you can expect the descent to say, let's say, half the time that it took you to ascend the summit. Now, of course, there's a whole slew of other sort of factors that come into play when you're descending, right? Ascending can be difficult just because you're sort of finding your way for the first time. But descending, we get hurried. We lose our focus, right? We become careless because, in part, we're so excited. We realize we've already made it. Now we just have to get back down. How hard can that be, right? We're excited, but we get careless, right? And we don't think the descent can be as difficult. Well, that's exactly why then it ends up being as difficult. And I talked about, some of the issues, right, is going down, there's just that constant impact on your feet, and particularly your toes. That is always meddlesome. That's always, that's never fun. And that really adds up and becomes especially noticeable towards the very end, like that last mile or two. And that's what can really make that last mile or two. In addition to that last sort of final pitch of ascent where you're usually scrambling, that final mile or two is probably the most difficult, again, because of the psychological factors at play, right? You're so ready for it to be over. I think I heard somewhere that, not surprisingly, because we get careless and whatnot, that most of the injuries that happen on these hikes actually happen on the descent. I mentioned that I lost a toenail. That's because of I didn't have as good at boots, so that didn't help. But then also, just given the nature of, you're going down 3,000, 4,000 feet over miles and miles and miles and miles. It's just you're gonna, it's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt to some degree, and you might lose a toenail or two, as I have. But more on that in the Mount Sherman video. Okay, I think that's all I have to say in terms of the day of the hike. Actually, real quick before I forget, let me get through the rest of. I should have taken a moment to go through the actual pack, then, like what's in here. So, I mentioned different hats, gloves. I went through some of this. You're obviously going to have then sunglasses then too. Whether I wear them, it kind of varies, but you want a pair of sunglasses probably. So I have those. I have waterproof case because I'm taking pictures and videos on my phone, and if it does rain, I want to slide that in there. Trekking poles. So I should say about that, I guess. I did invest. So I beat my other ones. I showed you those on Quandary. They just took a beating. They're no good. I did invest in a pretty good pair, more expensive pair, carbon fiber trekking poles. They're adjustable, 3-part. Trekking poles. So that's kind of a hot topic amongst climbers. Pro and against trekking poles. For what it's worth, I used them this last hike. I never really used them before. Sans the Quandary, the winter one, I definitely used those. But otherwise, I hadn't really ever used trekking poles. I did try them out this past hike with these new ones I got, and so they're supposed to help out your knees quite a bit. And as I get older, that's certainly something I have in mind, is wanting to protect my knees at all costs and do whatever I can to help them, and especially on that descent, right? Adding more points of contact can then take off some of the weight and pressure that's been being put on these knees. So that's definitely at play, and one of the reasons why I purchased them and used them. But at the same time, it's like they take time to get out, set up, right? So that's a factor. They take their weight, right? So you have to put them on your pack and in your pack. You have to pack them somehow. And then also, I just feel like they actually kind of hold me back a little bit. Like I'm not as able to go as fast for whatever reason. Maybe that's actually a good thing. I don't know. But so I had mixed kind of feelings. And maybe that's something I would get more used to. Maybe as I use them more, I wouldn't have that sense of them holding me back. But I have at this point mixed feelings on the trekking poles. But there are people that swear by them, and there are people that are very much against them. So it is what it is. But what else in here? I mean, basically, you're talking about extra clothing just in case, emergency supplies, so merino wool socks. You have your rain jacket, another jacket, and then long legging, pants or underwear just in case it does get cold. If I get stranded somewhere, this is emergency stuff down here at the bottom just in case, right? Whole thing packed here with everything you might need in the worst imaginable situation. Mentioned toilet paper, right? A bag to pack out, and that's we have a utility knife, flashlight, headlamp. What else? I think that's really for the most part that's it. Here's my utility knife just in case. Man, this thing weighs a lot. But again, everything you put in here, you better be sure you need, or you might need an emergency. Otherwise, no need to take it. Oh, and I do have a tradition. Oh, it's not. I didn't leave one in here, but I do have a tradition then also of I like to hold a sign when I get to the summit that says the name of the summit and then how high it is and the date, and I'll put that then in the pack as well and get that out. But sometimes I don't do this as much. Recently, I might print off photos of the trail, anything that would be helpful, possibly helpful in terms of route finding and so on. I might store that in there as well. But I think that's actually then it in terms of that. So let's go ahead and move then into the final section of this intro video and talk about the plan for the videos in this episode moving forward. So we went through a lot here. You've heard all kinds of various musings that I have on hiking in general and what the day of the hike is actually like for me. And so I tried to touch on everything that I wanted to talk about in terms of hiking in general before then now moving on to the videos in this episode moving forward, right? They're going to have a completely different feel, right? Basically, as I mentioned, so we're going to go ahead and get into that and what you can expect here. So, as I mentioned, each video or each part of this episode moving forward is going to chronicle a particular hike. And at the outset, at least here, right, that means a Colorado 14er. And so I plan again on going chronologically. So we'll start with Mount Bierstadt and move our way forward. And so we'll take a look at each of these particular hikes that I've done. And that's the plan moving forward. I plan on providing a video with pictures and the videos I've taken on the hike, as well as, I'll add probably some context, talk about maybe where I stayed. At the beginning of the video, I should say, I'll begin by adding some context for the hike, talk about maybe who was with me, if anybody else, where we stayed, maybe different aspects of the mountain, right, to consider, or the things that were interesting about it. Some memories maybe that stood out the most. If there are other hikers involved, I will oftentimes ask them what their memories were, or most pronounced memories of that particular hike were. And so, at the outset, I'll probably provide all this, and then I'll get into the actual pictures and videos from the hike itself. So that's the general sort of plan, or what these videos will look like moving forward. Real quick, I mentioned the other hikers. I wanted to introduce them in a little bit more detail here. I won't say too much about them, but there are basically 3 other dudes. These are really good friends of mine that have been really good friends of mine for decades now, who have, well, 2 of them I referenced, had already climbed 14ers before I started, and they were probably some of the inspiration for me wanting to start myself. That would be Daniel and Jamie. And then Josh is the third one. He started the same time I did. His rookie effort was also Mount Bierstadt, the subject of the next video. So a couple of us, anyway, these 3 will be my partners in crime for the most part. Not to say that there might not be other people that join me, and I'll mention that if that's the case. But by and large, these are probably going to be the individuals that will be doing the hiking with me, if there are other individuals involved. And so sometimes I like to do solo climbs, or if there's no one else with me at the time that wants to do it, I'll do a solo climb. But sometimes I go with, like I said, buddies. So who are these buddies? I mentioned Dan and Jamie. They both had prior experience, especially Dan. Dan lived out in Colorado for a while. I think he lived in the outskirts of Greeley, and so he lived there in Colorado, I want to say, for maybe like five-ish years. I don't know exactly. And so he did a lot of climbing when he was out there. Now that was 15-ish, at least 15 years ago. So mind you, all of us are significantly older at this point, and Jamie reminds me of that often. Granted, he's done all this hiking, or he did this hiking, has this past experience. He says this, right? Don't expect me to necessarily be able to do all this moving forward. So the idea being they're not in good of shape as they might have been, when they were 10 years younger. But anyway, Dan and Jamie, they've had some experience, and again, Josh and I were the noobs when we first did. So there's Bierstadt, as you'll see in the next video. And that was Jamie, Josh, and myself. So Josh and myself, that was our first, attempt at a 14ers. So a pretty significant one for us. And, Jamie had done a few before that. But I don't think he had done any up for a while at that point. So anyway, those are the other climbers you're likely to experience or to encounter for the most part. So yeah, nothing too fancy. For the most part, these will be probably short and sweet videos, at least relatively speaking, compared to all the other content you tend to see on this channel. They'll be, rather short videos. And so, I hope you look forward to it and enjoy, these videos as much as I enjoy putting them together and, making it happen when I went out on these hikes. I really do enjoy, going to Colorado. It really is an escape for me. I love climbing these 14ers. I'll probably continue to do so for as long as I'm physically and mentally capable of doing so. And so again, I hope you enjoy coming along for the ride. And so that's it. Let's go ahead and conclude this intro video of part 0 of episode 2, where we've talked all about hiking. Here you've heard me discuss all the sort of other aspects of hiking before we now turn our attention in part 1 to the actual hikes themselves. In that first part 1 video, we'll talk about Mount Bierstadt, my first rookie effort, right? My first attempt to climb a 14er. So stay tuned for that. Thank you.